This time, instead of explaining the history, I will explain the Japanese language. Japanese is a language spoken mainly in Japan. Its origin is not yet known, but it is believed to have diverged from the Altaic languages widely distributed in Eurasia. In addition, Korean and Japanese have very similar grammars, and Korean is said to be the language most similar to Japanese. Until 10,000 years ago, when the Ice Age ended, Japan and the Korean peninsula were connected by land. When the glaciers melted at the end of the Ice Age and sea level rose, Japan and the Korean peninsula were separated by the sea. With this in mind, it is easy to imagine that the Japanese and Koreans have very similar languages. Japanese belongs to a rather difficult language for foreigners who want to learn Japanese. The Japanese language has 4 writing systems: hiragana, katakana, Chinese characters, and alphabet. It is easy to imagine that many countries have only a single notation system, making the task of memorizing them very difficult. How did Japan come to this way of writing? This was because ancient Japan did not have its own writing system. In the Heian period, Japanese rulers sought to increase their own power by paying tribute to the Chinese emperor of the time, seeking to have themselves recognized as kings of Japan. The first Chinese characters found in Japan were gold seals sent by the Chinese Emperor Han around the 1st century. This seal contains characters meaning King of Japan, which was recognized by the Han dynasty. Later, Japanese rulers interacted with Korea and China, bringing Chinese characters to Japan, and by the 5th century, iron swords and bronze mirrors with names of Japanese places and people written in Chinese characters had been discovered. These characters are believed to have been brought by foreigners who came from Korea and China. It is believed that many Koreans came to Japan to escape the war in Korea. These Koreans brought much of their culture to Japan. In the 6th century, many people grew up educated enough to read Chinese writing from China. They borrowed Chinese characters that had the same sounds to write Japanese. This is called manyogana. The difficulty with Chinese characters is that there are 2 different readings. The onyomi, which uses the sounds that came from China as they are, and the kunyomi, which applies the same meaning as the Chinese characters to the Japanese language. For example, let's say there is the Chinese characters for. This is read as so in the Chinese language of the time, and pronounced so when read phonetically. This is the onyomi reading. This Chinese characters means grass, and in Japanese it is pronounced kuza. This is the kunyomi reading. In other words, there are cases where Chinese characters introduced from China are used as they are, and other cases where they are applied to the Japanese equivalent of the meaning of the Chinese characters. This method of expression called onyomi, which uses the Chinese characters as they are, has dramatically improved the expression of the Japanese language. The Chinese characters were used to create a new Japanese language. These words are made up of a series of Chinese characters and are called idioms. For example, there is the word sugan in the idiom using the word kuza mentioned earlier. This is read as zogan and means grasslands. Chinese characters are called ideographs, meaning that each character has its own meaning. Chinese characters often have meanings in their constituent parts, and even if you do not know the Chinese characters, you may be able to convey some nuance. For example, the Chinese characters for sake are read as sake and its meaning is salmon. The component part on the left side is sakana, and this is called the fish part. If this component part is present, it is a fish of some kind. Even if we do not know what the Chinese characters for saba are, we can read that it is a type of fish. This Chinese writing, which came from China, was an essential study for aristocrats serving at the imperial court. During the Heian period, nobles wrote everything from official documents to diaries and poems in Chinese. When writing Japanese, the Japanese used manyogana, which were written using Chinese characters that sounded the same. Hiragana and katakana are simplified versions of the manyogana. In the Heian period, hiragana and katakana were considered to be used by aristocrats for private writing and by women. When the Tang dynasty of China became unstable due to continuous warfare, Japan ceased official diplomacy with China, and a nationalistic culture unique to the Heian period was born. This would be the start of a unique Japanese culture devoid of Chinese influence. Under these circumstances, aristocrats began to produce official texts using Japanese rather than Chinese characters. Thus, the Japanese language came to produce texts using hiragana, katakana, and Chinese characters. Japanese can be expressed entirely in 46 syllables. Both hiragana and katakana are pronounced the same way. The alphabet can also be used. If we read them in order.
あいうえお。かきくけこ。さしすせそ。なにぬねの。わひふえほ。まみむめも。やゆよ。らりるれろ。わお。ん。
The next major transformation of the Japanese language occurred in the 19th century with the Meiji Restoration. With the Meiji Restoration, Japan began to engage in diplomacy with foreign countries, something it had not done before. Japan rapidly adopted Western culture. This is where katakana came in very handy. Words taken directly from overseas could be written in katakana to indicate that they were foreign words. For example, baseball can be written in katakana as baseball, and we can recognize that this is a word from overseas. And Japanese scholars have chosen to use meaningful Chinese characters rather than katakana as much as possible to express new words such as chemistry, medicine, and economics that came from the West. For example, the word chemistry in English is written kagaku in Chinese characters. This was named chemistry using ka meaning to convert. In this way, scholars of the Meiji era converted new academic words from the West into Chinese characters to make them easier for the Japanese to understand. China and Korea, which were also trying to westernize their language, adopted these new words created by the Japanese and made them their own. I have heard that many of the idioms used in China today are words that came from Japan. Finally, let me explain the alphabet. After Japan's defeat in World War II, English rapidly became popular in Japan, following the lead of the United States, which provided guidance to Japan. We adopted English as our education. We understand and use words in our daily life without any problem, even if they are written in alphabetical form. Japanese people are not very good at conversational English, but they can read English sentences. In this way, Japanese people use multiple characters to write Japanese. In this issue, I explained the formation of Japanese characters. In the next issue, I will briefly explain grammar. If you enjoyed this article, please subscribe to our channel and click the like button.